What's up, everybody? Happy Sunday. It is time for Sunday Scaries. First thing I want to start with, do you know what Sunday Scaries means, Justin? Because I guess some people don't.
I do. I do know what it means. Yes.
Is it something you experience on a regular basis?
Not with my job, but when I was in school, especially college, I experienced it massively. It
Yeah.
really sucked. Yeah, I got a lot of anxiety. So.
Yeah. It's just the general feeling of the Sunday night. The anxiety hits you when you realize what you have for the week to come. I got it really
Hmm.
bad when I had a shitty office job, but now I don't really get it because I like my job, which is like pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this stream's going to be really useful, really informative, really fun. And we're going to talk all about outreach and doing it in groups and how to talk to people and basically whatever else we want to talk about. And all donations will go to pro animal futures campaigns to ban slaughter and the sale of fur in Denver. So if you have a question you definitely want to get answered, make sure to donate so that we see it because I don't know if I'm going to be looking at the chat too much. Mostly going to be talking to Justin. But yeah, all right. Let's go ahead and get started. So, Justin, you just finished a week with Allied Scholars for Animal Protection. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the tour and what you were doing?
Yeah. So I never really done a tour before, but I had talked to Dr. Faraz before. I actually interviewed him. I think it was almost a year ago. Actually, we just got like a reminder, and so I think I emailed him or I interviewed him about a year ago. And what's interesting is over the course of this past year, he's been sending me messages every now and again that was like, hey, this person at like Ohio State saw the video and started their own ASAP chapter, or this person here started their own ASAP chapter because they saw that video. And so, I mean, I had him on because I thought I liked his mission. I liked the idea of starting these little hubs at universities, essentially. And then those hubs both doing outreach at the individual level, but then also trying to make systemic change at the university. Um, I like that for a bunch of reasons. I like the meshing of the individual and systemic change, but I also like hitting colleges because these are the people who are going to be moving into the job market. They're going to be the movers, the shakers, whatever. They're going to be the people
Yeah.
who have power, and so especially targeting Ivy League schools and things like that. I just thought was like a really smart strategy.
Yeah,
So
plus
yeah.
like the idea of change kind of starting at the local level and creating
Hmm.
these sort of closed social systems
Hmm.
that people are interacting with these groups of vegans on a regular basis. It's not like you just talk to someone once and then that person, you never see that person again. Like when
Right.
we go to a school for a few days, I'll have conversations with a student the first day, the second day, the third day, and they'll talk to
Hmm.
other people as well. So it's a lot more powerful than just talking to random people on the street.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, you're right because the campus itself, right, is a much more closed system than even a city. Like I go out and do outreach in the city. I do it like at the farmers market and stuff. But it is way different than a college because like even standing at the college, like you said, I would see the same people walking by, and sometimes the same people would come up, and other times I would just like I would be at like a restaurant across the street, and then I would see people that I talked to yesterday, and they would give me the old like how you doing, whatever, and they would, and then of course I'm there eating vegan foods, so they're saying it's not not that inaccessible, which is what everyone says,
Yeah.
you know, and so yeah, like just seeing the person you talk to integrated in that little community and that redundancy effect of like getting the message multiple times, I think is definitely like super powerful. But yeah, so I basically I sort of obviously I believe in the vegan message, but I believed in the tactic or the strategy or whatever you want to call it as well. And so I actually wanted to come up and get my feet wet with it. And I wanted to come up for longer, but I can only take off so much time, unfortunately. I only have so much PTO. So I decided to come up for a week, and this week is just kind of the one that worked for me. So yeah, it was
Nice.
just yeah.
Did you so what schools did you go to and what did you do at the schools? Did you do dog meat or heel milk or just kind of debates?
Mhm. Yeah, so I only went to UPenn. So they were just at UPenn for this final week of their tour. So I just drove up to Philly, got a hotel room, and then like for 4 days, just did a bunch of different events with them. So the first day we did dog meat, the second day we did Hugh milk, and then the next 2 days we did like ask me interesting questions and get a cookie. But then we also so that was just like our like 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. slot. And then the first day we also did AV for 2 hours after all that. And then the other days like Faraz had to talk, and there was also a movie called Mamaduke
Hmm.
that we watched. And so like every day was jam packed, And obviously I'm like getting there a little before 10. I'm having to get all my equipment and all that shit. And so, oh, sorry, can I curse in this
Yeah, you
stream?
can say whatever you want.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, these were like probably like 9 or 10 hour days of like what was almost exclusively just doing outreach activism,
Yeah.
And the most like I've definitely worked on vegan stuff for like 10 to 12 hours a day, but it was mostly editing videos. I've never been out in the field for that long. It's like usually like 2 to 3 hours, maybe four. If I'm like really feeling frisky on a certain day, I'll go out for 4 hours, and maybe at max have four conversations, maybe five if like someone ejects early. But these, I was like, you were having like 10, 15, 20, like maybe 25 conversations a day, depending on what you consider to be a conversation, you know?
Yeah.
And so it was just a completely different ball game, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I see Faraz is in the chat. Hello, Faraz. Thank you for enabling us to go on tour with you. Yeah, it's definitely jam packed. That's one of the first things I noticed when I went on the tour kind of last October was just how much my outreach improved because yeah, I would go out maybe a few hours or more on weekends, maybe once or twice a week, but doing that every day for like
Mm-hmm.
9 hours a day, you really work on your chops and
Yeah.
yeah, it's awesome. Did you find that you were able to keep up or was it a bit of a struggle?
Okay, I would say the first and second day, it was definitely a bit of a struggle. Um, I actually came into it not feeling so great. There was actually a point, a day or maybe like a few days before, where I actually thought I was like not going to go on the tour at all. Um, I don't know. I don't know how much I want to get into this, but I I have like health anxiety, which I wasn't like formally diagnosed with until
Because you're
extremely,
vegan, you
yeah, exactly,
should.
exactly, until like very recently. So it dates back to like my Lyme disease and this other shit that happened to me when I was younger. Um, it seems that I was probably somewhat traumatized by those events with how sick I got, and so now I have a bit of what people would call like hypochondria. Like
Mm.
I have like this like minor symptom and then I fixate on it and I can't stop thinking about it. And I'm like,
Wow.
I'm like, I go to the doctor. I'm like, I need blood tests. I need X, Y, Z. And it's just kind of like, it'll spiral out of control just every once in a while. And I got this like a week or two before going on this tour. And so I was just like completely like frazzled before I went there. So the first 2 days I was already like, I was just like feeling like shit. Um, but actually, the funny thing is I actually ended up feeling better on the tour. Just being outside all day, talking to people, like these are the things I like to do, and so they actually kind of lower my anxiety. Whereas sitting at home on the computer all day kind of raises my anxiety.
No way. Sitting at home alone, looking up your symptoms raises
Yeah, I
anxiety.
know,
That's
right?
crazy.
So, uh, so yeah, it was actually good. It was like exhausting, but it was also kind of like therapeutic for me, I think.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the first 2 days were rough, because it was a lot, talking to that many people and hearing that many like shitty arguments over and over. It's like it starts to get to you. You're just want to like grab the person and be like,
Yeah.
why don't you understand this? You know.
Yeah. Did you
So.
find you were able to kind of compartmentalize conversations? Like, let's say you have a really shitty
Mhm.
conversation. The next one, do you bring any of that anger you feel into it? Or are you able to kind of like start over fresh?
Yeah. So by the end, definitely. Like one conversation, like didn't mean anything to me for the next conversation, and in fact, I think that's sort of like a larger. I think I have like five things I want to talk about, like about
Oh,
why I think
perfect.
this is like offers like sort of unique opportunities for learning, and this is one of them. So like doing long days and doing a ton of interactions, you don't hang your hat on any one interaction that much. Once you start just plowing through these interactions, it allows you to just be like, okay, I had 15 interactions already. That 16 one didn't go so well. Okay, fine. No big deal.
Hmm.
But if I'm going out to do 3 interactions in a day, and specifically if I'm like filming them for YouTube and I have one bad interaction, it's like, well, fuck, that's just 1 hour of my time totally wasted. You know what I mean? I didn't move that person. I don't have a video, so what? I was just standing out here for nothing, And then that can
Yeah.
really like start to get in your head. But the thing, and the other thing is because of that, I don't go super experimental on those days. Because sometimes someone says something and I'm like, ooh, I could really like, maybe I could twist the knife more, or maybe I could even soften a little more. But I'm like, no, just stick to the plan, do the thing you plan to do, the thing that works most of the time. But when you're having like 15 to 20 interactions, I'm just like, fuck it.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
why
try
not?
something. You know what I mean? Yeah, let me just try something. And sometimes you fall flat on your face, and you're like, okay, well, whatever. There was a bunch of other interactions. But sometimes you say the new thing, and you're like, oh shit, that kind of worked pretty well. Let me try that in the next one. Oh, it worked again. Let me try that in the next one. Okay, now I got a new thing I'm saying. You know what I mean?
Mm.
That I probably wouldn't have developed if I was playing it safe because I only had 3 interactions. You know, and so I think it gave me that latitude to be more experimental and to take bigger risks.
Did
Yeah.
you find, well, first of all, can you turn up your mic a little bit? Someone said it's a
Yeah.
little quiet. Second of all, did you find any new things that worked really well that you experimented with?
Yeah, yeah. Does that sound better? Oh, I'm getting a little bit close to clipping, but I'm just, I'm nervous. Hold on, let me just turn it down just a little bit. Because I'm getting
Yeah, it's
excited. I'm
it's fine
talking.
for me.
Oh,
So
is it?
it's
Okay.
yeah, it's just someone in the chat said that.
Okay.
Um
Sorry, what was your question?
yes, so was there anything that you said that maybe you wouldn't have said that did work well that you're going to integrate into your outreach now?
Yes. One thing is talking about sexual exploitation.
Mm.
I had never talked about it that much. And when I did describe it, I was like a little hesitant and maybe I kind of minced my words a bit. But I didn't do that for this. I started like really experimenting with it, just being like speaking very plainly about it, getting into like somewhat the gory detail of it, and then really highlighting the sexual exploitation as like just part and parcel of animal agriculture.
I like that because it's so true. I mean, like
Yeah.
all these animals are sexually exploited. Was that specifically, were you talking about dairy or just all of it?
So it came from the Hugh Milk Day because
Yeah.
I almost never talk about milk. I usually start with pigs. And if someone says they're a vegetarian, I usually go to eggs. Those are just my sort of like go-tos. I just like
Yeah.
those. And I typically don't talk about milk. And part of the reason I don't is because it's like the sexual exploitation of a female cow. And I'm a little, or at least I have in the past, been a little bit weird about being like, you know, a white dude out there talking to women and being like, yeah, sexual exploitation. Like, you know what I mean? Like, let me educate
Yeah.
you about sexual exploitation and why that's bad. And so I've been hesitant about that. But what I found is that people actually responded pretty well to it. And like you said, it's not just milk, right? The same thing happens to chickens. Like we basically jerk off a male chicken and then, you know, impregnate the female chicken.
That's
And the
not
same with pigs.
how no,
Yeah.
no, that's not how chickens are reproduced.
Oh, really?
So yeah, they're so small, so it's like really hard to do that. So the way that they breed chickens is actually to put them in these giant breeder sheds. Joey Carbstrong has a pretty good video
Oh,
about
okay.
it. It's these horrible places where the roosters just go to town on these female chickens, and yeah, they're these really
Oh,
disgusting
weird.
dark
Okay.
sheds. But yeah, there's actually not, I mean, it is still sexual exploitation, but it's not like a human doing it like it is with
Okay.
the other animals in the
So
industry.
I did read stuff about them doing that to chickens and doing it like
Really?
manually. Yeah. So maybe it's like less common practice or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, the same with pigs, right? They still collect the semen. Like,
Oh, they do with pigs for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe it's less common. Maybe it's on smaller farms they do that with chickens. But yeah, so I was explaining that to people that there's like, you know, I would describe it in detail, and then I would also, if I didn't have a video, what I started doing is like pantomiming it, and which is like extra gross. But I was like, I think a lot of times in these conversations, if there's no visual, it all gets kind of heady, right? Very
Yeah.
abstract, heady, like intellectualized. And so that's why I always like to show videos because I want there to be like a very concrete, this is what happens. Yeah, we can play philosophy and like whatever all day, but you have to actually like engage with this in a real, like concrete way. And so if I didn't have video, I would explain it to him like this. I said, yeah, have you know, why does a cow produce milk, right? And so I'd say, so, okay, they take this like giant glove, they put it on, like on their arm, and then they insert their like fist into the cow's anus up to the elbow. They move around the cervix, and either they get semen from a bull, and then I like say they take this very long needle, and I'm doing like this the whole time, and I'm going through all the motions and like explaining it in like a lot of detail. And while people were kind of like, you know, they were cringing a little, but they still accepted it, and they weren't like, how dare you say that, or like, don't tell me, you know what I mean? They like,
Yeah. Yeah.
like the information landed on them. And what I said to him is I said, you know, and that's all of animal agriculture. Animal agriculture is built on on the sexual exploitation of animals' bodies. And every time I said that, people were just like, like you could like feel it, like kind of like hit them in the chest a bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was just it landed on a way that many of the other things I say don't land. Like it felt like it landed in the same way of them like watching the pig in the gas chamber or something, or sometimes if there's like a really good line. And it was landing so consistently that I was like, fuck it, I'll just keep using this. This seems actually pretty good. Um,
Nice. Yeah, I need to
yeah.
work that in more. I definitely like I talk about it on the Hue Milk Day, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but the other days it's not like kind of one of the first things
Yeah.
that I would bring up. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's disgusting that people are doing this to animals. So like of course it's gonna land with people.
Yeah.
Um yeah, very cool. So you said you had what, five things you wanted to cover and that was one of
Yeah.
them? What's the
Yeah.
next thing you got?
Well, let me tell you one other thing that I started talking about more that I thought was
Yep.
really good. And that is like bringing up slavery, or at least implying slavery. I thought I was going to get a lot more shit for that. And I've been, so in the same way that I've been remiss to bring up the sexual exploitation as like a white guy, I have been remiss to bring up slavery because I'm in the South,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of people of color, and it's like a progressive area. And so like the optics of me bringing up slavery, I've been like just self-conscious about, I guess. And so I was like, well, I'm going to actually, I'm going to try it here. I've got room to experiment. Like, let's go. And I found that it just like, it landed really well. Even when I didn't say slavery, they would say slavery, or they would give me like that knowing nod, like
What are
they were thinking
you Can you
slavery.
walk me through like how you do that?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so this is another thing I've been doing. So I typically would like go through my outreach and then be like, is this something you could do? Like if you're going to the store and you're going to reach for the cow's milk or the soy milk, like what's stopping you? And then they give all their objections, and I like kind of go through all the objections and let them ask all their questions. I basically put that out there so that they start saying objections. Because if I just do my outreach, they'll be like, yeah, that does all sound good. And they're like, you're right, that's all fucked up. And if I
Yeah.
leave it there, there's no objection. So then I say, okay, you're in the grocery store. You're going for that cow's milk, or you're going for that cow flesh. Why not pick up the soy milk? Why not pick up the Beyond Burger? Why not pick up the lentils? Then they go through all the excuses, which I like address the excuses as best I can. But then at the end, so it's kind of like a lot of times I'd be like, okay, so just so you know, as long as you continue to do this, animals are going to continue to die for you. Or like the other one I like is like, if you were in the victim's position, how quickly would you want this to stop? Like one of those little finishers to kind of like leave them with something. But what I've started doing is before I say that, between those two things, between the objections and between like the final little like finisher quote, I tell them like what I'm out here doing and what I actually think the problem is. And so I say, so everything we talked about, the gas chambers, the forced impregnation, the chicks in blenders, these are all symptoms, okay? What do you think the root cause of that is? And I usually let them like kind of say like what like a root cause. Sometimes I'll say, what do you think the psychological root cause is, to like prime them? And sometimes they'll say capitalism. Sometimes they'll say, other things. And I'll be like, yeah, I think all those definitely, like, those probably amplify things and blah, blah, blah. And I say, but I think the thing that really allows us to do this is that we don't see them as someone, we see them as something. We've commodified them, we've objectified them, we've othered them. And they're nodding along like you're nodding along right now. They're like, yeah,
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 that's really good.
yeah. And then I say, think about all the other times in history, because this has happened over and over, all across the world, all throughout time. Every time we've treated someone as something, those someones get fucked. And whenever I say that, like every person has been like, yeah, like they're like, that's true. You know what I mean? And so I either say it like that, or I ask them, I go, all throughout history, whenever we've treated someone as something, how did that turn out for those someones? And then they'll be like, I mean, horrible. Like, or they'll be like,
Yeah.
they were slaves, people would just like come outright and say it. And so that has been landing really well. I had one woman even be like, I think you just like gave me an epiphany today. When I said
Whoa,
that. Yeah.
nice.
And so that, yeah, I was honing that, and it was just working really well.
Very
So
cool.
those are
So
the two
yeah.
things that I learned that I'm like really like putting out there.
So talk about the reproductive
Mm-hmm.
exploitation and end with treating someone as something. How does
Yeah.
that work out for
Yeah.
people?
Yeah.
I
Those are
like
the two I
that.
like. Yeah.
Yeah, those are great because I feel like I mean, sometimes you get on the someone versus something thing in your outreach, but it's not like something you always do, right?
Right.
So now it'll
Yeah.
become something you always do.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been convinced recently that that's a really important component. That I want to both have, I want to explain the suffering and the torture and the killing, but I also want to explain like that those really are symptoms of a deeper problem. And so I want to separate like symptom and root cause because both are important to understand, you know? And also, no matter how humane something is, because people are like, well, like, what about if like my friend has backyard chickens, you know? And so I try to do like the agree ask thing with them, which I'm like, look, backyard chickens, they definitely suffer way less than these industrially farmed chickens. I don't think anyone's arguing that, you know. But at the end of the day, no matter how well they're treated, you still haven't dismantled in your mind this sort of pernicious and pathological relationship with animals. And as long as that's still kindling in your brain, this shit is always going to happen. It's always going to come back. And they have responded typically pretty well to that as well when I say it. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's
yeah.
really cool. That actually reminds me of we can kind of segue into another strength of ASAP's, which is having
Mhm.
multiple outreachers. Is this one the most recent tour I was on in Texas? There was this student there, and I had a debate with her, and she had gotten Chick-fil-A right before we talked. So we finished. We had the good debate, and she said she was going to go vegan. I was like, okay, great.
Mhm.
I didn't bring up the bag of Chick-fil-A that she had,
Yeah.
but luckily she walked over to the ASAP table
Mhm.
and started talking to Faraz. And Faraz said, "What are you going to do with the chicken nuggets that you just
Yeah.
bought?" And she said, "Oh, well, I already bought them. I'm going to eat them and that'll be the last I eat and then I'll
Mhm.
clean out my fridge." And he said, "No, you're still viewing those animals as objects. You need to
Mhm.
change the way you view them." And I think he said the someone versus something
Yeah.
thing. And then she threw him away. She came to his talk the next day. She had
Oh
told her
wow, that's
parents
a
she was
really
going to
good
be. And
interaction.
yeah, so I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, you kind of have to make a point to mention that it is a psychological problem. And yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
what we do to animals, it is just a symptom of the root problem that we have put ourselves so high above them that we feel like we
Mhm.
can do whatever we want to them, and that's the problem, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what
Cool.
I was trying to communicate to the people because like if all you think it is symptoms, then you'd imagine that you can always fix it with this fairy tale of like humane farming or whatever. You know, it's kind of like if you had like a brain tumor and I just kept giving you really good painkillers. You know, you can treat the symptoms. You probably feel pretty good, but eventually you're gonna fucking die because of the cancer. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, and
you
the
can
and
only
the
treat the symptoms
overdose.
so long. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But yeah. Uh, and I've got other stuff too, for like
Yeah,
other.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I see a few questions in the chat.
Yeah.
We're gonna answer questions at the end. If you definitely want them answered, then go ahead and make a donation. I'll make sure to get to them. Otherwise, we're just gonna move through our own stuff. So yeah, what do you have next, Justin?
A cool thing that sort of happened organically at first, and then I started doing more on purpose, is running interference. So what I found is it's fairly common for like a twosome to come up to the table, and one of them to be more passive, and one of them to be more active. And oftentimes the active one is a little more aggressive and a little more defensive and closed off. And what happens is they end up sucking all the air out of the conversation and everything is focused on them. And
Mm.
they frame the whole thing as this very complicated and like contentious issue. And so what I did once is one of the activists, so they had actually just had a really bad interaction at like what I call the hard table. And
Was it Kamari?
no, it wasn't. But I have an interesting story about him too. But this activist had a sort of bad interaction, was kind of like a little shook because of like what the
Yeah.
person said to them. So they were like, look, I want to kind of go to the easy table. So our hard table was like Hugh Milk, you know, where you're more arguing with people. And then ASAP has what I call like the easy table, which is like, if you're a vegan, come grab a cookie. So it's you trying to talk to other vegans and say like, hey, are you interested in ASAP? Are you interested in getting involved? So not so much like debate. So he was at that table and I went over to kind of like chat with him and help him over there. And this person just rolls up and they are like guns a blazing. This is like just as if you're a vegan, grab a cookie. And he's like, he's like, like, how can you even tell that animals are sentient? And like, no one even can define sentience. And if you think a dog's sentient, you should think a rock's sentient. It was just like, and he was just
There are
going,
8 criteria of sentience, people. We have a definition.
and so he's just going off. You know what I mean? He's just like da 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 da, and so. And he was talking to this guy who was at the table who didn't want to be like debating anyone, but it just happened who he came up to. And he was with a friend, and I could tell his friend was like a little more like, whenever he was saying the vegan guy was saying points, his friend was kind of like like kind of thinking, like nodding a little more, while this guy was just going off. And so I was like, hey man, well what about like I was like sentience in dogs is like, it's not really even contentious at this point. There's like, there's like the Universal Declaration of Consciousness, and I kind of started talking to him. And what I did, they were both standing in front of us. And so I moved off to the side while I was talking to him, which caused him to turn that way. And he started turning that way enough, and we started getting in a conversation enough that the other activist could now talk to the guy who was more receptive. Mm-hmm. And so like after like about a minute or two, we basically had now 2 separate conversations. Okay. And also now that activist had a really good conversation with that guy, which I think wouldn't have happened at all had I not broken it up. But even the conversation I had with this like contentious guy, I kind of turned it around in the end and at least got him to like admit some things. But he also wasn't performing for his friend anymore. You know what I mean? So he didn't have to feel like, oh, I like lost in the same way, because now it's just me and him talking. So he doesn't have his audience, his social circle, who it could be embarrassing to like lose in front of. And so I think there's a sort of double a double benefit to being able to do that and come in and like distract those people. But yeah,
I had because you texted me about this, like kind of what do you do if you're talking to 2 people and one person's really receptive and the other person's kind of trying to derail. So if you didn't have multiple activists to divert, what would you do in this situation? Let's say it was just you versus the 2 people. Then what do you think is the best course of action? Because I have an idea, but I'm curious what you think.
Oh, I don't know. I would just keep going hard on like the debate bro person, because like I get sucked into the debate bro thing.
Oh no.
That was also the thing, is like he was very debate bro-y, and this other vegan activist like is not really in that realm. And but I'm like, well, this is my shit. So like I'm gonna go in on this guy. In that case, sometimes what I do though is I start directing the questions at the other person and just see if I can hook them, because sometimes this person will just like get bored and just be like, oh, whatever, this is stupid, and then kind of leave. And so like I think the best thing is to probably just kind of start asking the questions to both of them. Like when they answer, be like, well, what do you think? You know what I mean? Or something like that is probably what I think is a better course of action.
A better course of action than just going debate bro. Yeah, probably. So what I do is like, you text me this and I was like, fuck, what do I do in this situation? Because this happens to me all the time. If I've had groups with like 6 people where one person's trying to derail and like the other people are kind of receptive. And I've tried different things where like, sometimes I'll just ask the person derailing to like, leave. And I think you can't be that direct with it. Yeah. So what I find that I kind of do naturally that I think works, before I even started really thinking about this, is I just kind of make it non-verbally clear to the derailer that I am not interested in their opinion and that what they're saying is stupid. But you can't like come out and say that. So basically you just kind of put most of your focus on the person who is receptive. And when the other person comes in with something, just answer it really quick or be like, and just focus, like make them feel as if what they said is stupid, because 99% of the time it is anyway. So it doesn't even require that much of an explanation. And then they'll kind of back off once they realize that you really know your shit and they're probably not going to beat you. And their friend is kind of listening more. So you can almost sort of set the frame of the conversation. Like, this is something that is important and that people are interested in. You're the problem that you're not finding this useful. Like the problem is you, it's not me. And I found that that's pretty useful.
Yeah, that sounds good. Because I think of it as like you're kind of rewarding their behavior by giving them all the attention. Because you're basically saying this behavior is good behavior, and you're getting the thing you want, which is attention. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So if you can cut off the attention.
Yeah. Then they're not getting the reward for what they're doing anymore. And so generally people will stop doing it. Unless they're like drunk and belligerent or something.
Even if they're drunk, I've found it works all right. I mean, like 60% of my outreach in my life has been to drunk people. So like, there's a lot of similarities.
I'm going to stop my camera real quick. Okay. I'm still here. just doing
Okay.
something.
Oh, Justin's doing something mysterious.
I'm just closing my blind so it wasn't hitting him in the face, but like my camera's right here, and if I did that, it would just be like my crotch in the camera. So I thought that would
Nice.
be indelicate of me. So, um, yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. Yeah, it also worked too. Sometimes what happens, especially with guys, is like a big group of guys will come up. Like this group of
Yeah.
8 guys was there, and there's like the like alpha, and
Yeah.
he's leading the conversation, and all the other dudes are like sitting back, just like nodding along. And I went up and I pulled one of those guys off too, like to the side. It was like I kind of like hey, what do you think, man? Like blah blah blah. And I like really moved laterally to pull him away from these other people. And then one of the other activists managed to have like a good conversation actually with like 2 other people there, or I think it was a good conversation. And so like I ended up doing that a couple of times, and I was like, oh, okay, this is actually something I need to be like cognizant of, and actually like not doing in the moment, but actually strategizing. And when I see a big group, like actually looking for that person, like making it a point to be
Yeah.
like, okay, where is this person? Because I know there's one of them. You
There's
know?
always one, and
Yeah,
they are the decision maker of the group.
yeah,
So what they decide is, cool.
yeah,
That's the group is just going to follow. Yeah. So that's
yeah.
super important. I found for whatever reason, I do really well with large groups of guys. And
Oh,
it's,
really?
I don't know why. I think what I do is I just like I don't try to be really cool, but like I say funny stuff to like kind of get them on my side first.
Yeah,
Like I make jokes or something like that. And
yeah.
then once they're like, oh, I guess this girl's like kind of cool, then it like works a little better. I
Mm-hmm.
credit it to like my party days.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, large groups of guys are like my favorite,
yeah,
but I think it's probably not something everyone is going to excel at.
yeah.
That's for sure. All right, what's your third thing?
Third thing. The third thing is kind of related to the first thing I talked about. So not just that you have a bunch of interactions, but that you can have really long conversations. So I kind of like, when I'm doing outreach here, I kind of mold the conversation so it's about 15 to 20 minutes max. I don't really want to go over that. I feel like you get most of the good work done in that time, and then I want to move on to another person. And I think probably that's the best way to do it. I feel like that's like a sweet spot. But here I was like, well, it's such long days, and sometimes you're hitting like those dead parts of the day, and it's like if someone's still talking, I'm like, all right, I'll go for 30 minutes. I'll go for 45 minutes, you know?
Yeah.
And I had some of these conversations that were like 35 or 45 minutes long. And it's like different things happen at different time points in the conversation. And as that conversation really starts to go on, you start getting like deeper. You know what I mean? And you start getting
Yeah.
into like these deeper concerns that the person has that maybe they weren't really ready to say at first. It's like a similar thing to like therapy, right? It's like this, like the stereotype is like, you go to therapy and you're like, this person's not
Yeah.
going to change me. I'm perfect already. And I'm not even, there's nothing wrong with me. And then by the third session, you're like crying and like telling them, your deepest
Yeah.
secrets.
Yeah.
And so I think like sometimes like those things come out over time. And I think it can be a different kind of conversation that you see. I know I had a couple of really long ones, and like it took the people really long to break. Like people I would have given up on, but because they were so long, like the people kind of started to break at some point, and they started asking different kinds of questions and being more open.
So, were there in these conversations, was there like a common big, deep concern they had, or were they like kind of the typical stupid excuses that we hear?
Well, I, I had 2 or 3 that were really long, and the common thing I think was just that they had like a lot of questions. They were like, okay, but what about like this situation, or what about this situation, or have you ever thought about this? And they tended not to actually be, well, except for the one guy, they tended not to be like super defensive. It was like defensive light. Like they weren't saying it in a super combative way, but they were just like, it was like they were checking all their boxes. They were kind of like, is there any reason? Can I find a possible reason why I wouldn't need to do this? You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
they were kind of coming from a bit of a defensive place, but they weren't being combative. It was like, and their brain was just going through, as I gave them more time to talk, every single excuse they could find. And I felt in those instances I was really able to tear apart every last little bit, just
Yeah.
like excavating their brain, just pulling out all the carnism, and just being like, and so those I felt like went really well. The one guy, and sometimes you start just finding like these wild views that people have. Like, I was talking to this one guy, and he was like, yeah, I mean, the thing is though, you do need milk and juice every day until the day you die, or like,
What?
yeah. And I was like, I was like, I wasn't sure if I was even under. I was like, milk and juice. And he's like, yeah, because the milk has the sugar. You need sugar every day, and milk, or sorry, juice has sugar, and then like milk has calcium. And I'm like, okay, but so you don't really need the milk and the juice. You need like calcium and sugar and like whatever. And he just kind of like kept going back to it,
That's
and
so weird.
it was,
Juice?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. He was from another country. I don't know what country,
okay.
but he was definitely from another country and another culture. And it like struck me as it had to be like some sort of like cultural folk wisdom or something,
Hmm.
because he was like really convinced of it, and he was like going to UPenn for brain surgery. He was a med
Wow.
student going for brain surgery, and he was like, you gotta have milk and juice every day until the day you die. And I was like, that's a real specific belief. Um, and so like being able to get to the bottom of that stuff was really interesting, and his was really interesting, and it kind of meshes into another advantage of doing this outreach with large groups, is that he kept saying like, I'm a med student, and so like he wasn't buying my like explanation. And I was like,
Mhm.
well, Faraz is a doctor,
Yeah.
and I was like, Faraz, come over here, and of course Faraz tells him the same thing I do.
Yeah.
He's like the same, like, you don't need milk, you need calcium, you need this, and like he was very eloquent with the nutrition stuff. I'm not like so keyed in on the nutrition, so I don't like have like the whatever. I actually tried to drive the conversation away from nutrition mostly. But he was like really keyed in the nutrition, so he sounded like more professional. And then of course he's like, I did like a thing in lifestyle medicine, and that kind of got the guy, like, he was more on board. But it also revealed something interesting, because he was talking about that, and then he was talking about like, how do we do this like from a financial situation. And Faraz was like telling him some stuff, and I was like, yeah. And just so you know, Faraz literally works for the Good Food Institute. So because he's like, what are we going to do? This is going to cause a huge economic, like, where are we going to invest? And I was like, well, Faraz actually works with GFI. He works with all these different companies who are doing alt protein, and like people are going to invest in alt protein. And that kind of like, having this like all this expertise and all this like these different viewpoints really helped. And he said something interesting, because Faraz was like, yeah, like, we can do this and this. He's like, I mean, I think, to me that should convince you. Or he said something like that. And the guy was like, oh no, he convinced me 45 minutes ago. He's like, but I got to explain this to my brother. He's like, and my brother is like a finance guy. And so like, so he was actually like, according to him, he was already convinced of veganism, but he was now worried about the social aspect, and
Mm.
specifically like, how does he make this argument to people in his family?
Wow.
And
Yeah,
so like,
you should be worried about that stuff.
exactly,
Yeah.
but it wasn't clear. Like, to me, it just seemed like he was just like having more objections, but it was
Yep.
this other concern, and a concern we know all too well. And so that was like a really interesting sort of, I don't know, insight to have in the conversation. So.
That actually brings up something that I've been thinking about lately, which is that, so I'm reading this book called Super Communicators, and it's really good. And it's talking
Okay.
about this jury duty thing where, like, there's like a trial and it has to be a unanimous jury.
Mm.
And basically, like, when people are giving their objections and whatever, they're not just thinking about themselves, they're thinking about like how their families are going to react and like the wider social effects. So I think maybe in
Mm-hmm.
outreach, we should bring some of that stuff up more, or even ask like, what would your family think, what would your friends say, like, because people are probably
Mm-hmm.
already more worried about that than we really think about.
Yeah.
So yeah, that might be like a good thing to bring up.
Yeah, that's interesting, because like, I've been trying to crack the code. So I read this book Change, and I made a video about it,
Yeah, that
and
was a
it's like,
great video.
yeah. Have you read the book, by the way?
Yeah, I
Okay.
did.
I really like that book. I really like it because he gives a lot of real world examples of like actual things that changed because of this, and it's like super counterintuitive. And I've just been like racking my brain trying to think, okay, how do we make this applicable in the animal rights movement? Like, how do we leverage this power? And I still haven't exactly figured it out. But I think that is interesting that like, once I got so deep with him, right, it's like you're saying, then I found this like extra motivation. But if I'm talking with someone for 10 to 15 minutes, that's probably never going to come out, even if
Yeah.
it's floating around. And I mean, this guy's position is basically that the social change is the thing. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
individual change is a minor part of it if you're just thinking about the isolated individual. Like we're social beings, we're integrated into the social fabric of societies, and it's like we evolved to be social beings. And if you got kicked out of the group, you were fucking dead, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So like now, of course, we can survive by ourselves because we have grocery stores and electricity, and I can just sit at home and play video games all day, and go to
And
my
eat
job and then come
cereal.
back. Yeah, and eat
Yeah.
cereal. Yeah, but like back in the day, you got kicked out of the group. It was like, you know,
You're
you
gonna
were like,
freeze.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're gonna freeze. Wolves are gonna eat you.
You're not gonna, you can't call an Uber. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that is interesting. That's
So
interesting.
I have some thoughts about how Pro Animal Future is like kind of doing this right with the change stuff. Because what we're doing
Okay.
is we're creating local chapters in
Mm-hmm.
different cities, and that
Nice.
kind of creates this pro animal social circle that you have that you're going to
Mm-hmm.
see every 2 weeks. And we're encouraging people who aren't even vegan to like come in and volunteer, and then hopefully they'll go vegan and whatnot. But yeah, it's also like creating that cultural shift, like, what's going to change someone's mind more, like having a conversation about veganism that could change them, and
Mm-hmm.
hopefully it will. But what if they hear that like a major city banned slaughterhouses? Like then
Yeah.
they'll see, oh, maybe culture's changing and like I didn't realize it and I don't want to be left behind
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So I think that initiatives are a good way. I think having like foie gras groups or just active
Mm-hmm.
animal rights groups is like a really powerful way to create change at the local level that can then expand.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because like I'm on here till 7:30, and at 7:30 I'm literally going to a meeting for the plant-based treaty, and we're trying to get our city to sign the plant-based treaty. So in a
Oh
similar
yeah.
way, like these broad scale like cultural norms, like oh they signed the plant-based treaty, they want to like not
Yeah.
have any new slaughterhouses, they want to not have they want to have like plant-based options everywhere, and just getting your cities and like you said like groups to do this is like it's a signal that people notice. So yeah, I think that's definitely important. But I think it's also, dude, man, I was lone wolfing it so hard for like the first 2 years of activism, and I
Yeah, me
only just
too.
recently a did this tour, but b got involved with my local like animal rights group here called NCOW, and I've done some stuff with them. It just first off, okay, if you're sitting at home alone and even just like us talking on the internet, it's great to like vent or whatever. But having other vegans like in the flesh who you go and talk to and you can complain and commiserate
Yeah.
and like share ideas, it's a totally different ballgame. And I know that everyone can't do that and it does suck. But if you
Yeah.
were in any sort of like small city or bigger, like I bet there's a group somewhere. Like check Meetup, check Facebook. There's a group somewhere probably that you can go link up with, and I would highly, highly recommend you do it. It keeps you motivated. It just is like such an emotional buffer against like the carnism like constantly crashing
Yeah.
down around you. And then you just get these things that like you can't do as a solo person. Like so two of the people in my group have started coming out with me to do outreach. They're like, oh yeah, we want to see like what you do with outreach, and I was like, yeah, maybe you guys could do outreach, and like we could critique each other or whatever. Natalie, they came out with me. I usually stand out there with a sign, and it probably takes like 20 minutes to get a person to come by. This one of the people that comes out with me, she's this woman who's very good at grabbing people's attention. And I swear now, when I go out, I don't wait more than 5 minutes before having a conversation. If I wanted to have a conversation and then break for 5 minutes and have a conversation and just keep daisy chaining that for the entire day, I'm confident as long as she was there, I could do that. And
What
just
does
like,
she do? Is she like waving or like talking to people or just
she's just,
standing there?
no, she's standing there. She goes, hey, do you want to come have a conversation real quick? Hey, do
Yeah.
you want to come out? And like, she'll just like say it to everybody. And
Yeah.
like, it's something about like her whole demeanor is very like, I don't want to describe it. It's like she's like friendly, but like kind of authoritative at the same time.
Hmm.
And it just kind of like draws people in. And I'm like, dude, this is like invaluable to me. I need you to
Yeah.
come out with me all the time because that waiting in between is like such a
It's
killer.
brutal, especially
Yeah.
like if you have a sign, like if I go out with like my sign about veganism and I'm just
Yeah.
waiting and people are like yelling mean stuff at me, like having people there, big difference. And yeah, I mean, not everyone has that privilege and it's a
Yeah.
bummer. And in New Orleans, I don't really have any other advocates. And honestly, like since just getting a job with an organization and having coworkers I can talk to regularly, like it feels
Hmm.
so much better than just like being on my own. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's really great. I think anyone watching, if you don't have that, check out Animal Activism Mentorship because
Hmm.
they have mentors in a lot of different cities and like a really strong network. So we can like connect you with people and you get a free mentor. So I think that's a great way to do it. And also, I think people are more afraid of moving than I think they should be. Like, there's nothing wrong with moving to a
Mm,
big city if like something's really important to you.
yeah.
So yeah, don't be afraid. I moved to New Orleans without knowing anyone. You can do it.
Yeah, it's
Don't come here though. Go to a city with animal rights.
that's funny. Yeah, I just like I can't sing the praises of doing this enough. Even like okay, even little stuff, right? So now when I go out, uh, one of the people works the camera, and so I don't have to go behind the camera and hit record and then walk back around every time. Well, okay, well that's not a big deal, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
except that sometimes you forget and you miss like a really good conversation. You know what I mean? Or you step out of frame or something. You know what I mean? You're
Yeah.
getting into it, you step out of frame. Now the video's shitty. You can't put that video up, and it's like just having that person there who's just like monitoring it, like, and if I have to go to the bathroom, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if I'm by myself, that means I have to tear everything down, put it in my box, get it, like carry it to the bathroom, walk all the way back, and now it's just like no, I just leave it up. I go to the bathroom, come back, it's nothing, you know.
Yeah.
And because those little things on a day of outreach, when you're out there and it's like hot and you're out, like, you're by yourself, so you have no one to chat with, and you're just getting like even if you have like one or two bad interviews, any little thing will make you just go home.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
like I gotta pee, but okay, now I gotta take all my stuff over there. I've done 2 interviews. It's probably enough.
Yeah. I've
You
got a
know what I
couple
mean?
videos. I'll
Yeah,
go
it's
home.
fine. Like I'll go back. You know, and it just prevents those sorts of things from happening. You know, it's just like all these like just like it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts, except like in reverse. It's like life by like healing 1,000 paper cuts or something.
Yeah. No,
So
it makes a huge difference.
yeah.
I'm wondering, like, was the group not there when you first got involved in animal rights, or had you just like not found them yet? Or I think when I met
Yeah.
you, you kind of wanted to focus on your own stuff, but
Yeah.
that book kind of changed your mind, or how are you
Yeah,
thinking about that?
yeah, that book did change my mind. The book was a big reason
Yeah.
why I started looking for a group. Um, yeah, so at first when I first was doing my stuff, I really just was doing a YouTube channel, and then I was like, I'll probably do it about psychology, and then I was like, I'm actually gonna focus it more on veganism and like psychology. And I mean, the way I think of a YouTuber is like someone who sits at home, they make a video,
Yeah.
they get done, they go hang out with their friends, and so like I even then I wasn't really planning on like excuse me, getting involved in the animal rights movement. Like that
Wow.
was never the plan. I was just gonna like make videos about veganism and like, yeah, that was it.
Okay.
So it was yeah, it wasn't probably till like a year or so later, especially once I started like Vegan Gays had me on, and then like you and me were chatting. You know, we had our little like group chat or whatever, and I started being like, okay, like maybe this is gonna be a community that I'm like involved in more actively.
Yeah.
Um,
Good.
yeah, I tend to be. It's weird. I'm an extrovert, but I tend to be like a lone wolf when it comes to like I don't know, like causes or like doing things. Like I like to hang out with my friends and like I don't know, chill or party or whatever. But when it comes to stuff like this, it's just like I have always just been kind of like me on my own. And I just think I left a lot on I've been leaving a lot on the table by not like integrating with a group and getting all those like benefits and like emergent properties that you get as a group, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's so much value, and I mean, you've probably read Atomic Habits, right? That book. It's about habit change. It's really good.
I read the other one. There's Atomic Habits and there was another one, but I think they're like
The
very
Power
similar.
of Habit.
I think that's the one I read.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So
yeah.
Atomic Habits has a whole section on like your social circle and
Mm-hmm.
how, if you're around people who are doing a certain thing, it normalizes that thing. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're around people who are always doing animal rights stuff, you're more likely to do animal rights stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, it will increase your ability to do so. And
Mm-hmm.
there's just so many benefits to it for sure. That's what I like about AV. I have some issues with AV, but I like that, they're in most cities. They provide a
Mm-hmm.
good kind of starting point to a lot of people. All right,
Yeah,
what's the
that's
next
true.
thing you learned
Oh.
or wanted to touch on?
Oh wait, I got a couple. Damn. Okay. I'll talk about this one first. So hard jobs versus easy jobs versus different jobs. Kind of been talking about it for a bit here with like the easy table and the hard table. It's another thing is like sometimes you just get like blown out on a day in activism. Like something happens and you're just like, I'm not feeling this anymore. And if you're doing an 8-hour day and all of a sudden you're not feeling it anymore, like if that happens at hour 2, that's a problem, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think one thing that I like that ASAP did is that they do have these different levels. Like they have like the hard table, like the human breast milk, the the Elwoods or whatever. Um, But they have this other table that like if you're a vegan, grab a cookie, and you just kind of talk to people who are vegans or who are very sympathetic about joining up with the organization. And that's a totally different conversation, a much lighter, like lower stakes conversation. And so having like hard and easy jobs, even for someone like maybe I'm like, dude, I come in, I'm like hitting the ground running. I'm like, dude, I am ready to fucking slay some carnies today. And I go hard for like 4 hours, and I'm like, okay, I'm actually pretty tired. Like I did a lot of conversation. I'm pretty tired. Let me go over to that table. So I think having like hard and easy jobs, but also different jobs, like kind of like what I was talking about with like the people helping me out. You know, if you maybe you really like outreach or you believe in outreach, and you're like, yeah, I want to get involved in outreach, but like I actually don't want to do outreach. You know, it's like, well, how does that make sense? Well, like you can come along and you can be the filming person, or you can be the
Yeah.
person who's like shouting people and be like, hey, come over here. You know, and I think it does two things. One, it allows you to actually help out with the thing you want to help out with. You know, and I mean, I can't overstate how invaluable those two people are to me, because they really do make it significantly easier. They make it way more likely I'm even going to go out. But if they are interested in outreach, now they're watching me do outreach all the time.
Yeah.
So they're getting like a front row seat to like training for free that like, you know, I think is going to be pretty helpful to someone who's never like seen outreach before or doesn't know how to do that kind of outreach. Because these two actually still, they do like leafleting, and like they'll do like things where they're holding signs, and they do talk to people about stuff, but it's not quite in this like super formalized like debatey way.
Yeah, a lot of people are afraid of what we do. So if they can see us doing it and see
Yes.
that, hey, it's actually not scary. You're just having like a pretty normal conversation. Maybe it's not a
Yeah.
normal conversation, but it's a decent conversation with people who are mostly going to be pretty friendly. Like it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's different too, like, because seeing people on YouTube, I think maybe it was you that said this the other day, or I saw some video on it, but like people on YouTube, they're not like hot shit. Like they're just like normal fucking people, you know. And
that was me. I did say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's something like I've also like, you know, I had a slightly different view of people on YouTube, and now from doing it, I'm like, oh, I just kind of figured out how to use a camera and stuff.
Yeah.
But like plenty of people go out there and just like talk to other humans like this. It's like I'm not like some special like person here. And so I think from also it's different, like if they see you on a video doing it and then they meet you, it's like, okay, wait a second, this is a real person. But then when they see you literally doing it in person, I feel like it does kind of bring it down to earth a little more. Like that's just like a human like me who I was just chatting with a second ago. Like I could go over there and do that. Now I haven't gotten either of them to go and actually do the outreach yet, but I'm wearing them down. I think they're gonna do it soon.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, what was I feel like I was going to say something. Oh, the hard table and the easy table. You know, the vegan grab a cookie. I think I only did that once, and it was great that it was there because I was sick. It was in New York City, and the sun was just like the sun doesn't
Yeah.
usually bother me. Like heat doesn't bother me. I live in New Orleans, but I was sick or whatever, and I was like, I need to just go sit inside at a table where I can eat those delicious cookies they have and just like chat with people. So yeah, having those options is great. It's even similar to like going to the gym. Like you're not going to feel great every day you go to the gym. So having like an easier workout option that you can do just to keep yourself consistent. Like those things are, they prevent burnout in the long run.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. But still keep you engaged.
Yeah.
Because it's different if you just like don't go to the gym for a week. You know, then if you go and just do a little something, it keeps that like habit like fresh, I feel like.
For sure.
Yeah.
What else? All right, next one.
I think this is my last one that I wrote down. We kind of talked about it a little bit, but multiple activists, diverse identities, diverse personalities, and diverse knowledge and skill sets. So I touched on that a little, and I think we touched a little bit like bringing Faraz in and be like, hey, Faraz is a doctor, like, and Faraz does like GFI stuff. So if you have like questions about alt proteins, because other people were kind of like, okay, but how do we do this practically? And I was like, well, you know, you can convince people, you can do systemic change. And they were like, they were still like skeptical. And I was like, well, there's also alt proteins, you know, like that one seems to be like, whenever you say alt proteins, people are like, okay, I can see that making a difference. Like
interesting. Okay, I never say alt protein, so that's interesting.
Yeah, so so I actually brought those up a couple times for people who weren't like, they weren't buying that individual change would make a difference. They weren't buying like systemic change on campus or whatever. But when I said like alt proteins, they were kind of like, okay, I can see that being like people always want the like the innovation solution.
Yeah.
I think that means they don't have to do anything, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I throw that on the table there to be like, there's many solutions, right? It's not just one thing. So, what was I saying? Oh yeah, the diverse like knowledge and skill sets. So I think that's good. Like, if someone's really fighting you in nutrition, and you've got someone there like who knows about nutrition, like the one of the guys I was just talking about that I go out with, he got his master's in nutrition specifically to argue with non-vegans.
I'm actually thinking of doing not a master's, but
Yeah,
there's like a nutrition degree. You could get
yeah.
like nutrition certified for $600. I'm like, I think I might do that.
Yeah, and then you
Like,
can just because he says it. He's
yeah,
he's like I just want to let you know I have a master's in nutrition and da 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 da, and it definitely
yeah.
does. Like people are like, oh okay, well maybe I don't know what I'm talking about so
I
much.
also heard I was listening to a podcast by it was the woman who wrote Sacred Cow, and
Yeah,
she was talking about George Monbiot,
yeah,
and she was like, "Oh, he has no background in nutrition," just like
hmm,
totally trying to discredit him just with
yeah.
that. So yeah, I think the more of us can get some sort of nutrition certification, the better.
It probably would be good. It probably would be good. Because like it's like I think like because what I would do is I would be like if someone's doing it I'd be like, oh hold on a second. It's like hey Beth, can you come here a second? And I'd be like, this person's a nutritionist. You know what I mean? And then Beth comes
Yeah,
over, and then because
yeah.
then like what are they gonna say? Like then it starts to get like harder. Um, then the other thing too is I think different identities matter. So
Mm.
I will say we did Hugh Milk. I did not like Hugh Milk that much.
Oh
Of
no,
the
why?
things I was not a fan. Well, so I think there's kind of two things. One, I think that Hugh Milk kind of frames it as like, isn't it weird? And like, I guess if that's like you're trying to hook the person in with that, and then you can kind of shift, which is what I did. But like, just because something feels weird doesn't mean it's wrong. You know what I mean? I feel like it's like
Yeah,
it's a little bit of like a bait and switch of like even like not just like obviously they're all bait and switches like in some degree, but it's like almost a bait and switch of the underlying ethics. Um, so I think that's like one thing I'm kind of like, whatever, but that's fine. The problem is that we had no female activists there. So we're just like, it's like four dudes on a college campus just shouting at people, "Do you want to drink some breast milk?"
oh
You know what I
yeah.
mean? And so like the
I guess
optics get a
I'm
little
usually
weird.
there, so it's,
Exactly. Right.
yeah.
And then like the other people are like college age or whatever, or they're like, maybe like 23, 24, 25. But like I'm like a like almost 40-year-old dude like shouting, "Do you want to
Yeah.
drink breast milk?" You know what I mean? So like it's kind of a little odd for me. So I think that was like where like having more diverse identities would have definitely like softened that a bit.
Yeah, man, Hugh
So
Milk is like my favorite because I don't start with the "Oh, isn't it weird?" I start with the "Hey, we're ethical Hugh Milk. Our women
yeah,
donate their milk. Cow industry. This is unethical, don't you think? Try our
yeah,
milk." So
yeah.
yeah,
That's a good way to do it.
um,
That's a good way to do it.
yeah. Darius calls me the CEO, and I'm like the generational farmer for Hugh Milk or whatever.
That's
So yeah,
funny.
it's good fun. But yeah, I can see how it'd be
You seem
weird.
perfect for Hugh Milk, both because you're a woman and you're like sort of like sense of humor. I feel like you
Yeah.
are like the like like you are like the person who I would put in charge of Hugh Milk for sure.
I love Hugh Milk. I don't. It's just
Yeah,
so stupid and like silly. It just cracks me up. I love
yeah,
Elwood as well. That one's good too. What did you think about doing the dog meat? Like, how'd you find your conversations doing that
yeah.
compared with other stuff?
I think I like that better, and I also think like the thing I liked about Elwoods is that a lot of people would walk by, and like I'd like fresh dog meat, grass fed dog meat, blah blah blah, and even the people who walked by and like didn't want to talk, I'm like, "Do you want some dog meat?" And they're like, "No, thanks." I'm like, "Why not?" You know what I mean? As they're walking away, and I think a large number of people got it, even when they didn't have the conversation. I feel like Hugh Milk is a little weirder because a lot of people come up and like this is the other thing is I feel like Hugh Milk selects for like people with a breast milk fet because like plenty of dudes came up and were like, yeah, I really would want to try it. Like they were like enthused. They were like super excited to try human breast milk. And like they weren't joking. And like they were like disappointed when we told them we didn't have it. They're like, "Oh, I thought there was like human." And I'm like, "No, like there's not
I've
human
had
breast milk
women
here."
be disappointed too.
Really?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Yeah. So I guess there's actually a market for like adults drinking breast milk out there.
Yeah,
So
it's kind of weird. There
yeah,
is some like human exploitation with that,
yeah.
which is a bummer for sure. But yeah, going back to the unique identities, it's great to have people of different races too, because
Mm-hmm.
everyone thinks of veganism as like this white thing. And
Mm-hmm.
whenever I was with ASAP, there were two white people and three people of color.
Yeah,
So just having those optics, I think, makes it a lot better. And
hundred
especially
percent.
with Elwood, we would get accusations of being racist toward Asians.
Yeah,
Be like, okay, well, we have, two Asians in our group right now.
Mm-hmm.
So like, what do you think about that? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's unfortunate that identity is so important to people. Identity of the messenger is so important to people,
Yep.
but it's a reality that we have to work with.
It is. It very much is. It's funny with the dog meat too. I actually the only two people who mentioned it being racist uh, were Asian people, and they were like joking about it. Like the one guy came up and he was like, "This is so racist, and I love it."
What?
Like, yeah. And
It's so
I was like, well,
weird.
it's actually not racist because, like, and I explained it to him. I explained like we're like critical of all animal exploitation. This
Right.
isn't meant as a way. And he was like, oh. And I actually ended up having like a really, really good conversation with him. To the point he was like, this is really smart. He was like, at the end, he was like,
Yeah.
this is good. I like that, you know. And yeah, another dude came up and was like, he was also Asian, and he was like, oh, I probably shouldn't stand too close to here. People are gonna get worried, you know. He was like making jokes. So like that was like I didn't. So no one actually came up and was like actually angry about like racism. So
Well,
I had
you
a
are
pretty good
lucky
experience
because
with it.
I've had
Yeah.
people yell at me. So
Yeah.
and flip us off and cuss us out and run away. They never actually like really want to talk to us about it. They just kind of want
No.
to be mad. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a bummer. But yeah, the reason I like Elwood so much is because it like you said, people instantly kind of get what you're trying to talk about,
Yeah.
and they get like it connects farmed animals to companion animals right away in a way that you
Mm-hmm.
kind of have to like work toward during
Yes.
other outreach. It's just instant. And
Yeah.
yeah, it also gets the most attention from my experience. So you have
Mm-hmm.
more conversations. And
Yeah.
with more conversations is more opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. That actually reminds me of something about the someone something thing that I forgot about. Is one thing I would start doing is if I really wanted to like really hammer home the someone something like idea more, before I would get to the end, I would be like, so do you have dogs or cats at home or anything like that? And people would be like, oh yeah, yeah. And I was like, okay, what's their name? And they tell me their name. And I'd say, what's his or her name? You know what I mean? I like make sure to like say that, and
Yeah.
like, is it like boy or girl? You know, and then they would say their name, and then I'd be like, oh, what do they like? Do they get excited when you get home? They're like, yeah, yeah, they love when I get home. And I'm like, do they get like scared of anything? Like, oh yeah, cars, or like they hate like lightning and thunder, and all this. And so I like really start connecting, and I'm like, have you ever had more than one animal? Like, do you notice they act differently? They're like, yeah, yeah. I'm like, so like they have different personalities. They can feel pain, obviously. They also like have emotions, like they get scared, and so I like build it all up for them, and then I say, it was interesting. You said like he is scared of lightning, or she like really is excited when you get home. But if we're talking about a cow, I think you probably would have said it. Most people say it, and they're like, yeah, yeah, that's true. And I'm like, why do you think that is? And that a lot of times can get them to the objectification on their
Mm.
own, or seeing them as something rather than someone, you know? And so like sometimes I would go that way with it, using sort of like this deep canvassing idea of getting them to tell me a story about their life. So
Mm.
now I'm trying to explain the someone something distinction, but with using that deep canvassing technique of a story that's relevant to them. It's not a whole story, of course, but I'm trying to get them to tell me things about their life. And so
Yeah.
that I found works pretty well too whenever I used it.
That's cool.
So
Yeah, because I usually like just ask people if they have companion animals, but I don't really
yeah,
typically go deeper than that. I mean,
yeah,
sometimes I'll say, are they ever scared when you go to the vet? And they'll say, yeah.
that's a good
Like,
one. Yeah,
can you imagine paying for animals to feel that way? And that
yeah,
seems to get people pretty well. But yeah, deep
that's
canvassing
good.
is interesting because we've been doing a lot of that in Denver, and we were having a hard time getting people to share stories with us because
Oh,
it's just kind of
okay.
like a weird,
Yeah.
like, I guess people don't really communicate in stories that much unless
Hmm.
maybe you know them super well, or some people are better at telling stories than others. So
Yeah.
yeah, I guess just asking those kind of deeper questions is a good way to elicit, even if it's not a full story, like something that creates an emotional response, which is at
Exactly.
the end of the day the goal.
Yeah, and something that's autobiographical. So like, while yeah, I mean, it could very loosely be called a story, but it is an emotionally valenced autobiographical thing. And it's also the thing people love to talk about. Like people love to like show you pictures of their
Uh,
dogs or their cats. It's like even like I was in heated discussions and then I'd be like, "Do you have like a dog or a cat?" You know what sometimes I'll just like pull it out of nowhere and they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, what's their name? And like, they're still kind of pissed off. And then they say their dog's name. I'm like, well, what is he like? Does he ever get excited when you come home? And like, that always breaks them because like,
Nice.
no one can think of like, if you're super mad and then you think of your dog being super excited when you get home, like everyone's just like, ah, damn it. Like, I'm so happy thinking about that,
Yeah.
you know? And so it kind of like brings them down and does like some double work there, I think. So it's something I
Nice.
definitely used quite a bit
Oh,
in
that's
this last
smart.
tour.
Man, I wish I could have gone on the tour with you. I feel like we would have
Yeah.
had so much fun just like
Yeah.
hanging out. Yeah. Yeah, that's the other thing is like there have been studies where if you tell us like when you're telling a story, people's logical part of their brain shuts down.
Yes.
And obviously, we want to emotionally manipulate people. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's really
It
useful.
does drop their defenses though, for sure. It's why like sometimes if you notice you're having a really good conversation with someone, sometimes they'll start asking you questions about yourself, and not just like, what do you think? How did you do? Like, how did you go vegan? How long have you been
Yeah.
vegan? Like, how did you make this work? When people start asking me that, some people are really defensive and still won't admit that like they want to go vegan or they're thinking about it. But once they start asking me those questions, like to tell them a story about how I did it, I know that I'm in their head at that point. Because
Yeah.
you're not asking me about how I went vegan, like to explain the whole story to you, unless you're like really wrestling with it. I don't think anyway.
Probably not. I mean, when
Yeah.
I think about like how long I've been vegan, how many people have asked me why I went vegan, it's like almost no one in my personal life because they don't want to know, right?
Yeah.
But if it's someone I'm talking to on the street and they are interested, they do usually ask about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's definitely important. This is the story I was going to tell you about Kamari. So he has a very unique style of activism, at least from what I've seen. He's very like I think Faraz kind of like put this bug in my ear, but it was like I describe his activism as like New York City activism or like New York
Mm.
City subway. He's like very like da da da
He
like
comes
a
in hot.
salesman. Yeah, yeah. He comes in real hot, real hot.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I watched him do two outreaches back to back, and his first one was with these two dudes, and they were a little bit of debate bros, a
Yeah.
little bit, but like not super debate bro-y, but a little like devil's advocate sort of thing. But I would say what they had is like what I call like common sense ethics, which is like this sort of thing that most people have, which is like a bit of a mix of like deontology, utilitarianism, virtue ethics. They don't have those words for it probably, but it's just kind of like a mishmash of those. And he's talking to them, and he's got his like little lines down of like, we're the same in all the ways that don't matter, or we're the same in all the ways that matter and different in the ways that don't, and he like he's like going at them hard, and they're like, dude, you are a great salesman. They're like, and like they were like kind of like defensive and a little like mean even at first, but by the end they were like, dude, yeah, you're good. You're a good salesman. They're like, I respect you, man. Like you're really good at this. Like blah blah blah. And even like, and he's going at the guy. The guy is leaving, and he's like, so are you going to go vegan? He's like, I can't say that I'm going to. He's like, well, look at this. And the guy's like, yeah, but I can't. He's like, so are you going to go vegan now? And he is just like hammering him as he's going. But the guy is like, it seems like the dudes like respected him for it. Like it like,
Yeah.
to me, I was like, it was like they were uncomfortable, but it felt like they were like, damn, he got me. You know what I mean? And I was like, wow, that's like, his personality really worked for that interaction. You know what I mean? I was like, that was just like really good. The next dude he talks to comes up, and the first thing the guy says when he brings up like animals or whatever is like, he's like, well, I guess it would depend on like the net utility. So like a person who is like just straight up a utilitarian, like immediately in like
he's an Alex O'Connor fan.
Yeah, in a casual conversation brings up utility, after like one or two questions, which is like pretty rare for most people, and they go at it, and it is just like it's going nowhere. They do not like each other. The thing was like, answer interesting questions, get a cookie. And Kamari was like, he's like, can I get a cookie now? And Kamari's like, no, I'm not giving you a cookie. You didn't answer that question. Like, he was like, you answered it like disingenuously or whatever. And like, so they kind of hit a point where they were just like, whatever, they were done. And the guy reaches out. He's like, okay, well, it was good talking to you though, man. And the guy reaches out to shake Kamari's hand, and Kamari's like,
Yeah.
Just like nothing.
I've seen that many times. Someone's asked, "Does Kamari get his stuff recorded?" Yeah, if you check out Harry's channel, Heri, some of his recent videos have Kamari in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had people come up to me in Texas at like a school that Kamari was at like a few months before, and they're like, "Yeah, this one guy was really aggressive to me," and they're like still mad about it from like
That's
months ago.
hilarious.
Yeah, so he definitely gets in people's heads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. So what I did is, so he got done talking to him, and the guy's about to walk away. This is the last day there. This is like, I think my last conversation. I'm actually sitting on the chair. I'm not even standing. So I'm just kind of like, I was like, hey man, did you say you're a utilitarian? And he was like, I mean, yeah. And I was like, well, like, are you or aren't you? Like, he's like, yeah, okay. So like, that's like what the frame I'm coming at it from. I'm like, okay. And I was like, so what animals do you eat? And he was like, X, Y, Z. And I was like, okay, so you eat chickens? I was like, do you know what happens to chickens? Because like during the conversation, Kamari hadn't actually offered him like a super concrete idea of what happened. I don't think they were kind of in like headspace.
Mm-hmm.
So I told him what happened to chickens, and I started talking to him, but I was like going more, like I was softer. I was coming like more obliquely at the question, and he was saying some wild stuff, like, you know, like at first he was like, well, I don't know if animals feel pain. I'm like, dude, do you really not? He's like, okay, they do feel pain. And I was like, okay, so you care about utility. So like, if you eat a plate of 20 chicken wings, right? Like, how many chickens had to die for that? And he's like, oh, well, I guess I divide by 2, so 10. I'm like, okay, so that was like 15 minutes that you're never going to remember. That's 10 chickens who lived horrible lives for 6 weeks and were murdered. I was like, how do you think that like is a balance in the utility scheme? You think that those chickens didn't suffer more than you got like a little bit of pleasure from that? And he was like, well, I actually just don't even think their pain matters. He's like, that doesn't even enter into my utility calculus. It's like not even like they're not in it. And so then we got talking about circle of moral concern. And, you know,
My favorite.
yeah, exactly. And so I'm like probing him. He's like, yeah, they're not my concern. And then I was like, so then I start going on like, yeah, like, you know, I think that circle of moral concern is interesting because people have had these different philosophical stances throughout time. But the thing that's really changed mostly isn't the philosophical, like the normative stance. It's like, what is that circle of moral concern? Because, you know, a lot of people just got excluded from whatever it was. Like we could go back in time and people would say, well, I don't care about the utility of X group or Y group. And he was like, yeah, that's true. And then we kind of switched the subject, but then we kind of came back to it later and he brought up slavery. He was like, yeah, I guess it is kind of like how slavery, where people were just like, yeah, it doesn't matter what black people think because they're just not even, you know, whatever. And this guy was black. And so he ended up bringing it up on his own in the end. You know what I mean? From like totally like nothing Stonewall with Kamari to even giving me a bunch of like shit. And then like after talking to him for like 15 or 20 minutes and slowly building it up and like making these analogies, but like making them low key. Like I didn't say slavery. I didn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He then brings up slavery, and then he does the thing that we were just talking about. Then he goes, well, okay, I am trying to build muscle. He's like, how do you do it? Like, how do you build muscle? Because like, I'm like, nice. I tried to eat beans for a while and it didn't like, and I was like, well, you can try X, Y, Z and blah, blah, blah. And then we're kind of in that. And he never really was quite like, yes, I do believe that they matter. But it was like, we were so deep and Kamari was still standing there. And I was like, there's no way he's going to admit it. There's no way he's going to be like
Kamari around.
He's not doing it. So like this to me is like as close to like a win as I can get with this guy. But I think he walked away then like both understanding like, first off, oh, there's different kinds of vegans. You know what I mean? And he's like, oh, this guy was pretty chill. And he kind of like talked in my language. But I think he also probably walked away thinking like, okay, maybe Kamari is a bit of an asshole. Like in his head, you know, I think Kamari is fine to do that. But I think he also could walk away being like, okay, I respect that because this is how serious it is. This isn't a joke. Like the fact that he wouldn't shake my hand shows that he takes this incredibly seriously. And it's like in line with the seriousness of the situation, you know? And I think for him to get both those perspectives is probably pretty valuable, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I love talking to people after Kamari has, because I just go in like super chill vegan.
Yeah.
I'm like,
what's
okay.
up, bro? I'm one of the good ones.
Yeah, pretty much. And it seems to like really kind of get rid of like the negative feelings of that interaction. And yeah, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the shit is serious. And like, I was doing this PETA demo on Thursday, and we were outside of the insectarium in New Orleans, and like we had these bug costumes on, and we were
Mm-hmm.
pretending to eat like a human. This guy was like covered in blood, and we had all these fake arms, and we were like drinking fake blood and
Yeah.
cheersing each other. And I was just thinking, like, man, this shit looks so insane to like anyone watching. And
Yeah.
that's good because like it shows like people wouldn't be doing this unless this
Mm-hmm.
problem was like really severe.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that the seriousness is important to convey. And I like how Ryan, I don't know, he is still in the chat. So the way he says it at University of Madison, he's the ASAP chapter lead there, and he just says to people when they're leaving, like, this is a serious, significant issue. Like, I urge you to take this seriously. When you do, the info's on here. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think just like getting that across is so important because it's easy to think like, oh, who cares about animals?
Mm-hmm.
But when people see people who like really care about this, I mean, they have to wonder a little bit like, why do people care about this so much?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
I had one guy come up that he like I didn't talk to him the first day, but he came up the second day, and he's like, okay, like I get like maybe you guys wouldn't like if someone killed a dog. He's like, but why do you care if like other people eat dogs or other people eat animals? You know what I mean? Um, After the thing, and I
That's
ended up
such a
having
weird question.
I
Like, I
know.
mean,
I know, for the same reason that any like you would care if someone was being racist to other people. Like, I
yeah.
don't have to like But yeah, I had a long conversation with that guy too. But it was it is interesting. It's like people's moral blinders are just so blinding. It's just like unbelievable.
So what was
Yeah.
the maybe you've already talked about it. What was the kind of craziest interaction that you had over the course of the week?
Yeah, I think that the one with the well, okay, remember I said like there was a big group of guys and like pulled the like alpha
The
dude away.
alpha.
He was being really weird. Like he gave me like psychopath vibes, and not in the sense of like how people are like I wouldn't care if animals died, like where you're like I can clearly tell you care.
Yeah.
This guy actually seemed really socially manipulative and like insecure and like sort of narcissistic. Um, I kind of pulled him aside and like he had a very like dead demeanor. He wouldn't make strong eye contact with me, and like he was like, I was like asking him questions and he was giving me like real trash answers, but then it was just like changing the subject. He's like, well, what do you think about this? And he was pointing at because we were right beside the Palestine protest encampment on the campus, which was like another interesting dynamic to field. And he
Yeah.
was like, "What do you think about this?" And I'm like, I think people have the right to protest. And he's like, "So you think that he's like, you think that people can just break the rules?" And I was like, I mean, yeah, people broke the rules all the time. Like that's why people broke the rules. That's why women have the right to vote. And like we don't have chattel slavery in the U.S. Yeah, sometimes you got to break
Yeah.
the rules. And this was without saying anything on my stance on that particular issue. I was just like, yeah, like people have the right to protest. And then he starts like changing the subject, and Benny is going around like taking pictures like for like just like generic pictures of like the event. And I forget what I said to the guy, but I had him in a corner where he was in sort of one of those logic chokeholds that like you just can't get out of unless you say something absurd. And he just goes, "Did he just take a picture of me?" And I was like, "I don't know." And I see Benny taking a picture. He's like, "He just took a picture of me." And I'm like, "Okay." And I was like, so anyway, I'm like trying to get back to the question. He's like, "Hey," he's like, "Tell him to delete that picture." And I was like, "This is like you can take pictures of people. That's not a thing." He's like, "Well, I want him to delete it." And I was like, "Okay." I was like, "Hey, Benny, did you take a picture of this guy?" And he was like, "Yeah, I was just taking random pictures." And he's like, "Can you just delete it?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, okay, sure, I'll delete it." And so I go back to the guy, and the dude just like looking at Benny. He's like, "Did he delete it yet? Did he
Oh
delete
my
it?"
god.
And I'm like, "Bro, what the fuck do you care?" And he's like, "I don't think he deleted it." I'm like, "Oh," and like Benny gets on his phone. He like is clicking around, and he goes. I try to go back to him. He's like, "I want to see that he deleted it." And I was like, "What do you like? You want to see his phone?" And he's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Okay, well, go fucking ask him then." And he's like, "You ask him. He's your colleague." And I was like, "Okay, man, this is nuts." I was like, "Benny, obviously, do you want to show him your phone? He wants to see that it was deleted." And and we're just being totally chill with the guy. He like gives him his phone, and the dude is like Like, it's like, where
Whoa.
do you think that photo is, bro?
Yeah,
Like,
like, you think it magically went to the beginning of his
yeah.
photos? Like, we all know how phones work.
Yeah, exactly. And he's just like, and like he is looking like full, like he's having like a like mental breakdown or something. And he gets done. He's like, okay, well, in the future, when you want to take someone's picture, you need to ask them. And then just like
No, you
storms
don't.
off. And I'm like, wow, that was like the like most obvious cope and like escape hatch I've ever seen in a conversation. It
That
was
was
just
the
like,
alpha guy? That's so weird because
yeah,
usually alphas have, like, a bit more social skills. That's why
yeah,
they're, like, alpha. But,
yeah,
yeah, people get salty sometimes
yeah,
when like, if they're actually mad about something else, they pretend like they're mad at the fact that you're recording
exactly,
them. Be like, "Okay,
exactly,
well, it's public land," or even if it's a
yeah,
university, like, there's cameras around us all the time. So, I don't think
yeah,
people realize how much we're always being recorded.
yeah,
But yeah, that's funny. Well, I know you have a thing pretty soon.
yeah.
Um,
I can answer
so
some questions if there are some.
let's see if there are some questions. There was one a bit. Okay. The women's suffrage and civil rights movements were not won through conversation, they were won through direct action. What do you two think? So yeah, what do you think about that?
I don't know enough about the history of it, but I mean, I think the thing is with like direct action is that like clearly some conversations are taking place. You know what I mean? Like the ideas don't spread out of nowhere. Like someone is talking to someone in all these instances. And so yeah, I mean, I think you need direct action, you need conversation. I think you need like a multitude of approaches. But yeah, I'm always confused when people say. I guess maybe they mean that like, people weren't doing direct outreach, maybe. But like these things were still talked about because they're not
Yeah.
gonna like no one is gonna fight that hard for an idea that does they don't at least have had some conversation about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean, like, at these sit-ins and protests or whatever, I'm sure there were people there, like, answering questions
Right.
to
Yeah.
people who happened to be there, right? Like,
Yeah.
there is some form of conversation taking place, and conversation does change people. We can see that through, like, deep canvassing
Yeah.
research and whatnot. And, yeah, what we're doing at the end of the day is changing culture,
Mm-hmm.
and in order for culture to change, people need to change their minds, and also, yeah, we want direct action as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing too is you have to have a solid argument for the direct action to work. Because like
Yeah,
if I just go start doing direct action, that can definitely. I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by direct action, but you can
yeah,
definitely draw attention. You can definitely like, but then you maybe you change laws and stuff. But even changing laws, like you're having to convince someone to change those laws. You know what I mean? Like you have to win hearts and minds in some way. And so like I just see them as like inextricably linked. There's actually something I was going to say. I think would be cool for ASAP to do. I was kind of talking to them about this, but like people would often say, well, like, what am I going to do as an individual? Like, it doesn't make a difference. And, I would give them the standard stuff. But then I was also like, the other thing is that ASAP actually is trying to do institutional change on campus by getting like more plant-based dining options, just as like one example. And I didn't say like plant exclusive dining hall, but like getting more options.
yeah,
And when I said that, everyone was like, oh yeah, that's great. Even the people who were like, most of the people who were like, I agree with you, but I don't know if I'm going to go vegan. That's like
yeah,
80 to
yeah,
90%. 80 to 90% of people agree with you. And then like, I would say probably like 60 to 70% of those people are saying like, I'm not going to go vegan, but I agree sort of thing.
yeah.
But all those people were pretty much like, yeah, whenever I said dining hall, they're like, oh, okay, yeah. And it also made me seem less like idealistic. Like, oh, what, you're just going to change every single individual? It's like, no, it's
Yeah.
not just about that. There's other things. But I
Yeah,
think it would
people
have been,
laugh at us when we say that.
yeah, exactly. But I think it would have been cool if we had a petition right there, right? And say, like, actually, we are trying to systemically change the dining hall. Here's the petition for it. Would you like to sign that? And then especially if they've been going the whole time and like they're admitting this is all wrong and like we shouldn't be doing this, blah blah blah. But they're like, but I'm just too, I'm just too weak-willed or whatever to change.
Yeah.
It's like, were you too weak-willed to sign this piece of paper after we just had a 20-minute conversation? Probably not.
Yeah.
And so like I
I
think that
love
would be a
that.
cool thing to like kind of integrate again the conversation, the individual, the systemic, and show that it is all actually linked together. But yeah,
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, obviously, we have to do both. And yeah, it looks like Faraz gave us a donation. Thank you so much, Faraz. He says, thank you, both of you, for first, everything you were doing, and second, for joining ASAP and helping me. I look forward to working together until every cage is empty. Much love.
yeah, that's
You're the
awesome.
best, Faraz.
Yeah,
Thank you for making this tour possible. Because, yeah, I mean,
yeah.
it's just, did you get a lot of good footage, Justin?
I don't know yet. I had, I brought a different kind of, because my camera shuts off after 30 minutes, my like giant nice camera, and it's also huge and like obviously
Yeah.
very obvious. So I got a little GoPro that I could just set up and hit record, and it records like for an hour or so at a time. But I just set it up in a spot, and then like I don't know, as you know, like there was a lot of people, so people are just coming up at all different angles and points, and it's like kind of messy. And
Yeah.
so I got to go back through and actually look through all of it and see what I got. But I mean, there's something in there, you know.
Yeah, yeah, it's
But
tough. I'll
yeah,
have like a really good conversation, and then at one point someone's like out of frame, and then it's like, ah, well, now I can't use any of this conversation.
yeah,
So
oh yeah.
yeah, I know the
I had
struggle.
some really good ones that just like my camera just stopped recording. Like
Mm,
I had these
I hate
drunk
that.
people come up, and they were like super drunk, and I was like, this is
At,
going
on the
nowhere.
campus?
Yeah, yeah.
Weird.
It was some like special day they were having, but they were super drunk. They came up, and I was like, oh, this is gonna go nowhere. I was like, whatever, I'll just fucking try. And by the end, I thought this woman was more touched than almost anyone else I talked to, and I laid it all on her. That this was like the last day when I was like, I was hitting the sexual exploitation. I was hitting like, do you have dogs? I was hitting the like,
Yeah.
someone something. And with her, the very last couple that I did, I started doing like one final thing that I didn't get to hone, but I was like, it was like what I'm calling like inspiration at the end. So rather than just explaining the problem, explaining the symptoms, then the root cause, but then like you have to actually inspire the person. And I haven't really tried to inspire people too much because it's like a little bit of a different thing. But I just started like winging it. I was like, maybe if I start trying to sound like poetic or like,
Yeah. Oh, I love inspiring people. That's one of my
yeah,
favorites. Like painting a future they can
yeah,
imagine, right? Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And so I started doing that a little more with her, and I feel like I kind of nailed it with her. And I was just like, and there was a guy watching me actually who's also with the ASAP chapter, but like he wasn't participating that day. He just kind of stopped by, and like I got done and I looked back and he was like, you know, he gave me the look like, damn, that actually went pretty well. And I go over to my camera, it's just like fucking off.
Do you remember what you said?
um, just choked on my spit.
Okay, I'll say what I say. So yeah, I usually say like, imagine a future. Like, do you think the world would be better if we evolved away from using animals as resources? Like, that's my favorite line. And then try to just like paint this compelling vision of like, we already treat dogs and cats like we love them. Like, what if we treated every animal like dogs and cats? Like, wouldn't that just be a nice future for everyone involved? So that's how I like to say it.
Sorry, I got too excited. I do like that. What I said to her is, she was asking me, she's like, okay, well, what about like indigenous tribes or something like that? Like, what would you say
Yeah.
to them? And I said, look, I think the first thing I just want to say is that obviously there's like examples where someone cannot be vegan, you know, there's certain barriers where they can't do that. But I'm not going into the wilds of Canada and talking to them. I'm talking to the most privileged people in the world. I'm talking to you. You're at UPenn, like, you know, one of the
Yeah.
top premier Ivy League schools. I say, I know you're smart. I know you're ambitious. And I can tell by the way you talk to me, I know that you're compassionate. If the people here, if you and me aren't doing this, who's going to? You're going to be in positions of power like hardly anyone else has that opportunity. You have that opportunity. When we look back through history, who do we say are heroes? And I got this from Faraz. I'm like, do we say the people who just like stayed quiet, who stayed comfortable? Are those the people we admire? Or is it the people who stepped out of their comfort zone, who spoke up when they knew an injustice was happening? I was like, you have the power to do that right now, and you have way more power than the average person. And so I'm like, so what are you going to do with it? And she was
Nice.
definitely like, she was definitely struck by that. So,
Good.
yeah.
Nice. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess you probably have to go.
Yes, I do.
But thank you so much for coming on. This was awesome. I'd love to have you
Yeah.
on again in the future. You were officially the first guest at Sunday Scaries.
Okay,
So
I thought I might
glad-
be. I was like, I don't think I've seen her have someone on before.
I haven't.
But yeah, yeah, awesome. Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for having me on. It was fun. I really hope that one day we actually get to do outreach together because I think
Let's make it happen.
we've had it
Yeah.
planned twice, and both times it didn't manage to come to fruition. So
Yeah, maybe I think that next spring, maybe I could swing an ASAP tour because it's not an election year. So it'll be easier for me.
oh, I see. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, that'd be sick.
So save some PTO for then.
Yeah, I will. I will. Awesome. Okay. Well, yeah. Thanks so much. I'm gonna get out of here and go to my plant-based treating.
All right. Good luck. Later,
Yeah.
dude.
Take it easy.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, that was Justin of Debug Your Brain, who is, yeah, he's just the best. And he's helped me with my channel so much. His sign that says, help me grow my YouTube channel and answer thought provoking questions was like a game changer for my outreach. It was a lot better than going out with a sign about veganism because, that kind of triggers people. So, yeah, really awesome. Faraz, then we can have both of you. I would love that. That would be amazing. All right. If anyone has any last questions, I'm here to answer. Other than that, I do kind of want to go over like a little kind of campaign roundup just because a couple things have happened in the campaign that I want to share. So I'm going to share my screen. So our opposition has spoken on our fur ban that we're doing. It's going to be on the ballot in Denver, and they call it Denver voters to decide 2 anti-agriculture ballot measures, which is obviously ridiculous because we're not anti-agriculture. We love agriculture. Agriculture is great. We're anti-animal agriculture. So this is one of the things that the meat industry does that's really annoying is they call themselves the protein industry and they say that they are agriculture. Meat is not the only thing that has protein and it's not the only type of agriculture. So stuff like that really drives me crazy. But there's just a lot in this article that's kind of ridiculous. Like, I don't know what kind of handbags and wallets and gloves use fur and cowboy hats. I guess maybe some of them use beavers, but their campaign slogan is going to be keep your hands off my hat, Denver. And once again, they're playing the victim here when they are not the victims in this situation. The animals are the victims in this situation. It's not their hats. They killed these animals, they stole their skin, and now they're wearing them as a hat. So this is the second time that they've made it like, oh, they're the problem and we're just the victims, even though they're the ones literally torturing animals. So that just really pissed me off. And then another thing that I think is hilarious is there was this Spotify. This is a podcast where it's this podcast called Food Chat, which is like a pro ranching farming podcast. And they brought on these 2 meat scientists, Bob Delmore and Jennifer Martin. And I think they both work at Colorado State University. And they were talking about our campaign, spreading misinformation about it. They're saying that like we're going to cause people to not be able to eat meat in Denver, which, while I would love if that were the case, that's not the case. We're just going to shut down one of the largest lamb slaughterhouses, which won't really affect much of the food supply besides lamb, which is already a premium product that people don't really eat anyway. So it's not going to affect prices in the grocery store. But they are scared of us, which I think is amazing. It's an amazing feeling to have meat industry people talking about your campaigns and talking about how like we don't even know what the effects of this are going to be. It's going to be really negative long-term effects for the industry. It just felt really good because the other thing that was interesting about it was that they were encouraging people to go vegan. They were saying like, oh, if you do have a problem with animal agriculture, then just don't buy meat, but don't prevent other people from buying meat. And I think this shows again that they don't really take animal rights seriously if the only focus that we're doing is turning people vegan. We need to focus on turning people vegan and also this systemic change. So, yeah, I just thought that was an interesting insight into them. So, yeah, that's all I got on the campaign. Let me see if I have any questions real quick. Yeah, Harry, his channel he's very name the trait. If you like name the trait, you will definitely like it. All right. Don't really see any questions. So I'm going to hop off, but thank you so much. Okay, wait. If Pro Animal Future have questions about fur use, you could reach out to Caft. Yeah, I should do that. I know Tyler. Yeah, I'll ask him about the gloves and the hats because that is weird. Natalie, can you do an interview with Jillian Berry? I am not sure who that is. Should I know who that is? If you can set up the interview, I will definitely do that. Tell him to come on my Sunday night stream. And yeah, in the podcast, they're just talking about how animals are harvested. They never say the word slaughter. They're like, oh, I can't believe they're saying the word slaughter because that makes people feel emotional. But that's like literally what's happening to these animals. So yeah, it's all this ridiculous stuff. I spoke to a Jehovah's Witness today and asked the same questions as Conspiracy. Is there a spiritual way to kill an animal? How did that go? I'm curious. I have not asked people those questions yet because it's hard for me because I'm not really religious. All right. Great. Well, I'm going to do a stream next week. If you have guest requests, you can email them to me at thejugglingvegan@gmail.com. If y'all have any other questions, feel free to, message me on Instagram about anything. I'll be happy to answer. And other than that, I will see you next Sunday. Oh, thank you, Renzo Alba. Great work. Appreciate you. You're the best. All right. Good night, y'all.